wrestling fans, this is D. Silvers, correspondent for Ngats Wrestling. Today we have a special treat for you. Today on the show, we're going to be interviewing Cactus Jack to talk about some of the biggest moments in his career. Without further ado, Cactus Jack. Thank you for coming on the show, Cactus. This is a true honor. Let's get right into it, shall we? The other day, I happened to be looking through the Ngats Wrestling's extensive footage and couldn't help but grab the ECW One Night Stand DVD. I must say, talk about an epic show. You and Edge versus Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer. I gotta ask, with that type of violence, were you nervous at all?
E-C-Dub. 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 D. Silvers. Those letters haunt my dreams. They bring nightmares when I'm allowed to sleep. They send shudders down my spine when I hear them. You see, D. Silvers, when Mick left that bingo hall in Philadelphia in search of big paychecks and bright lights in New York, Uncle Vince told him he had to tone down the violence. He said Cactus Jack was too desolate for American audiences. So Mick, being the whore that he is, stuffed Jack into the deepest recesses of his mind, only allowing momentary glimpses of those bright lights over the ring. But even then, Jack was nothing more than a mask, so to speak. I was a mask. Whatever Foley wasn't man enough, wasn't strong enough to take on the challenges that awaited him. But Jack would be given the full reins. No, I would not be allowed to grab those reins and wrap them around the neck of the likes of Randy Orton, Triple H, not even Edge at WrestleMania. So when the One Night Stand pay-per-view was announced, and I was once again going to walk through the doors of the Hammerstein Ballroom, I tore out of Mick with a vengeance! Once again, I would be allowed to commit the kind of unspeakable acts that I've been waiting for. And this time, the letters above the door not say WWE, no! They said E-C-W. And that meant that I could finally do the things that brought Jack the most joy. You see, D. Silvers, only the hardcore fans of ECW could appreciate the level of violence that brought a smile to Cactus Jack's lips. A smile that only the fans that chanted E-C-Dub, E-C-Dub could appreciate. Baby!
And Hammerstein Ballroom appreciated every minute of it, Cactus. Unbelievable. You once regarded Tommy Dreamer as foolish. I'd just like to get an idea of what happened, what changed. We all believe that you respected him and up to that point looked up to him, and we just want to know what happened. What changed?
That's a funny question, D. Silvers. I never hated Tommy Dreamer. fact, it was the exact opposite. I loved Tommy Dreamer. There was one moment in time, many years ago, that still swirls through my head, still makes my blood boil.
Kane Dewey?
Kane Dewey. Kane Dewey. D. Silvers, it's no secret that Dewey Foley is my son. At the time, Dewey Foley was 3 years old. There was no real internet back then. You couldn't hop on a Wikipedia page and learn all about my life. No. Somebody in that arena had to take the time, had to take the effort to learn about Cactus Jack. And what did he do with that knowledge? He ripped out my arm! He threw it on the ground, took a flaming branding iron, and swung for the hole-in-one! You see, D. Silvers, it was at that moment that I realized what I had to do. You see, Tommy Dreamer was a man's man. He had all the tools to make it in this sport. He was young, well-built, and most of all, DB, he could wrestle. But he turned down the guaranteed money and the big paychecks from WCW to work for a pissant named Paul E. He was brainwashed. Paul E. had Tommy Dreamer believing that he could achieve all of his goals from some rundown pisshole bingo hall in Philadelphia. This asinine idea that counterculture can become mainstream ideals. But I knew better. The ECW fans didn't want the kind of wrestling that made a little Tommy Dreamer grow up to do. No. They wanted blood. Lots of blood. So Tommy would have to throw out the wrestling he grew up on. He'd have to throw the wrist locks and the figure fours out the window and replace them with kendo sticks, thumbtacks, and flaming tables. Silvers. These are all things that I know very well. I've long come to enjoy the feeling of peeling dried blood off my flesh. The smell of festering laceration when it was time to change a bandage. Tommy Dreamer didn't have to do this. Tommy Dreamer deserved better. He didn't have to put his body through that. Long ago, I sealed my fate, and I was now content to suffocate in it. I wanted the best for Tommy Dreamer, and I knew that I would have to hurt him to see that he didn't have to go through that kind of pain anymore. So I did what I had to do.
And you did. Your matches with Tommy Dreamer were legendary by any standards. The two of you redefined hardcore wrestling and made your name, Cactus Jack, synonymous with hardcore. But I have to ask you, After losing a ear and years of the hardcore lifestyle, how do you continue to do it?
Some people would say that to do what I do, you'd have to be fucking psycho! And maybe they're right. But I don't see it that way. As a little Jack growing up, I dreamed of being a professional wrestler. I dared to believe that I could make millions jump out of their seat. But when I got into the business, I realized nothing I did was good enough. Nothing I did was good enough for them. They didn't love me. And then one day, not too long after I started, the day I first drew blood, I remember that day very well. You see, Davey, I was being beaten badly. And I had to do something to turn the tables. And as I laid outside of that ring prone, my opponent coming at me to deliver more punishment, I'm not afraid to say that I was afraid. I didn't want to get beaten anymore. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a steel chair that nobody had been sitting in. And as I grabbed that chair, D. Silvers, I felt the steel in my hands. It was cool. And as I looked up and my opponent was bearing down on me, I did the only thing I could think of. And I swung for the fences! The sound of that steel bouncing off his hard skull made a sickening thud. I stepped back, and I played that sound over and over in my head. I was surprised at how beautiful it was. It was like the first note, beautiful ballad. And as I looked down on my opponent, who lay unconscious in a pool of his own blood, the pool began to get bigger, like it was expanding and filling a hole in my soul that I didn't even know was there. Baby! And as the ref grabbed me and pushed me back a couple of feet so that he could attend to my fallen victim, that's when I heard it for the first time. The roar of a crowd. It was a small arena, a high school, maybe only 200 people in attendance. But at that moment, I was back in Madison Square Garden as Jimmy Superfly Snuka leapt from the top of that cage. The sound was deafening. After a few more matches and a lot of blood, it became like a drug to me. I couldn't get enough. It didn't take long before the other wrestlers didn't want to work with me. They thought that maybe Cactus enjoyed what he did just a little too much. And maybe I did. And that's when I heard about Japan. D. Silvers in Japan, the rules aren't as strict. I was doing unspeakable things to my opponents here. The thoughts and images of what I could do in a country that embraced barbed wire and C4. Those images began to get too beautiful for me to ignore. And that's when I decided it was time for Cactus Jack to visit the land of the rising sun.
You are referring to the death matches in Japan. Those matches are absolutely brutal. In '95, you became the king of the death matches, defeating Terry Funk in the final round. Those matches were unbelievably vicious and brutal. You two have become friends, but I gotta know, what was it like to go to the final round against your nemesis Terry Funk, who's considered just as, or maybe even more vicious than you?
Terry Funk is a man's man. His slaps are harder than most men's punches. His punches are harder than most men with the jab. You see, the deathmatch tournament is 3 of the most brutal matches in your entire life in one night. Just an hour before, I'd been in the fight of my life with Terry Gordy. He sliced my arm from shoulder to elbow, and I didn't think twice about it. So as I stepped through that curtain for that final round, and I looked in that ring, wrapped in barbed wire, and I saw Terry Funk, I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. And I saw Terry Funk. I was overcome with the feeling that can only be described as fear. And as I approached that ring, battered, bruised, bloody, with nothing but electrical tape and glue to hold me together, I looked up, and I looked Terry in his eyes. I saw a man who was old and beaten up, and I began to feel a little better. And as I climbed into that ring, and I saw Terry up front, the Funker didn't look like he had anything left in the tank. And I got cocky. And when that bell rang, and we started our dance along the squared circle, being careful not to step into the barbed wire boards that were laced with C4, I got a little overzealous. I made the first move. And I stepped towards Terry Funk, and he hit me with a right that sent me reeling. And he opened up a gash just above my left eye. And the blood tickled my cheek as it trickled through my beard. My fear came back. But as that blood made its way to my mouth, and a tiny drop slipped onto my tongue, the salty warmth spread throughout my body, and I began to feel that feeling, oh so familiar. I had to hurt Terry Funk. And he wanted to hurt me. Now, D. Silvers, Terry Funk was going to bring everything he had. I had to bring more. And I did. I hit him with everything they had. I went out of the ring. I grabbed unused barbed wire rolls and threw it at him. And he kept coming. I had to double arm DDT him through the barbed wire board twice. And he still kept kicking out. I went through almost half that match without having to touch the barbed wire myself. Then he hip tossed me into one of those boards. And as I hit, all throughout my back, that C4 exploded. Bits of flesh ripped off and then charred by the resulting explosion. I didn't think I'd be able to go through. I grabbed a ladder and I put that ladder in the ring. And I climbed up as high as I could. And I dropped my elbow onto Terry Funk. And that son of a bitch kicked out! He kicked out! I heard the announcers and the audience counting down. It was getting to that 10-minute mark. And the ring was going to explode. I got back on that ladder. I climbed it all the way to the top. And I dropped that elbow. And then I ran. I ran like a coward. And that ring exploded. And when the powder and the dust cleared, I climbed back into that ring. And I tried to cover that old man. He kicked out. What kind of a man kicks out after being blown up? There was nothing more I could do. I picked up his crumbling, lifeless body, and I DDT'd him into the barbed wire again. And this time, he stayed down. And when that bell rang in the crowd in Japan, started chanting my name. Cactus. Cactus. Cactus! And I walked back to that dressing room. I had a new name. I was the king of the deathmatch. Baby!
Cactus, I just want to say it's been a true honor to have you on the show. I really appreciate you coming on. There you have it, folks. Cactus Jack. This is D. Silver signing off, and we'll return to the Ngatan Wrestling Show.